or your phone, I want you to go to Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2. Last Sunday, at the end of the second service, we had this really cool moment where at the end of the message, during the invitation, we had three folks who came forward to publicly identify themselves with Christ and be baptized. One was Xavier Huffaker, who'd been a part of our Bible school, and then Austin and Ashley Gregory, who are here this morning. And one of the challenges when you have two services is sometimes, something happens in the first service, it doesn't happen in the second, or vice versa, so it's hard to keep everybody together. But it was a really cool moment, and yesterday, Cody actually baptized three students out at the lake, so it's been a great week. But last week, during those baptisms, we had another cool moment, and our normal custom is whenever there's a younger person baptized, we like to bring in the older kids from the back so that they can be a part of it. So, we don't bring in the babies or the toddlers, but anybody that can understand what they're watching, we try to bring in. And if you were here last Sunday during the second service, you know that when they came in, it looked like an invasion. I mean, it looked like a little midget army was walking in here. They told me in between services today there were 85 kids checked in to FCC Kids last week. So I don't know how many are back there today, but I'm telling you, it looked like an invasion. And while all that was going on, I was back in the baptistry there, and it hit me, last Sunday was the 7th anniversary of Jamie and I moving to Monticello. So I was looking out the window here, and I was kind of looking at the kids, and it hit me, most of those kids were not born 7 years ago. You know what I mean by that? It's just how quick it goes. And then I got to thinking about kids who were like in middle school 7 years ago. Now they're, in college, or they were in college, and now they're, they're out doing their thing in their career. So it moves so quickly. And one of the cool things about being at a church for an extended period of time is you get to see some of that. You get to see kids grow up and all of that. Well, I was trying to think of a way to illustrate how fast this goes, and I want to show you a picture. This is Cannon 2 years ago on our vacation at the beach, and at that point he was 10 months old. So when you go to the beach with a 10-month-old, it's really pretty easy. You know what I mean? You set them down in the sand, they're pretty much there. You know what I mean? They're not going to go too far. It doesn't say too much. It's mama and daddy, maybe, grunts a little bit, has a good time. You take them to the water. You don't have to worry too much about them taking off on you. I mean, that's pretty much what it is. Well, what I've learned is that stage, while it's fun, does not last long. Let me show you a picture that was taken 2 weeks ago on our beach vacation. I don't know who taught him that pose, but he'll turn 3 next Saturday. And I've learned that going to the beach with a 3-year-old is a lot different than going to the beach with a 1-year-old. Now, instead of, just sitting in the sand, he's walking around. He's flexing at random people on the beach. Instead of just, talking, and grunting, he's talking about helicopters and ice cream and wanting to play putt-putt and all the stuff that you do when you go to the beach. So I've learned it. So I was thinking about this, and I was looking at these two pictures, and I thought, man, if the last 2 years were like that, what are the next 2 years going to be like? And some of you all have children, you can relate to all that. You've been there with your kids. And with kids, there's this expectation that over time, if things are good, if everybody's healthy, that they'll grow. And one of the fun things about being a parent or a grandparent or maybe an aunt or an uncle is you have a front row seat for all that. You get to watch all of that take place. If everything goes well, there's no health issues, that's sort of the way it works. It just automatically comes. And with kids, it's easy to sort of tell whether or not they're growing. I mean, you can look at pictures, you can do the height and the weight chart, you can keep track of what they're eating, how much they're eating, you can keep track of what size clothes they wear, and you kind of know whether or not they're growing. If they're not growing, it's a pretty good indication that something's gone wrong, that something needs to be looked at. When you read through the New Testament, it's clear the same principle that applies to your physical life also applies to your spiritual life. There's an expectation that if you're a follower of Jesus, that over time you'll grow and mature and develop. The problem is it's sometimes hard to tell whether or not you're really doing that. Sometimes it's hard to tell whether or not you're really growing or whether or not you're just sort of going through the motions. So last week we started this series. We're calling it the 4 chairs. We talked about the first chair last week. That's the chair that's labeled seek. The people sitting in chair one are people who are still trying to find answers to their questions. They're still trying to figure out whether or not they really believe Jesus is who he said he was, where they fit into all that. Some of you are sitting in chair one, and you've spent all week thinking about it, talking about it, trying to figure out where you are. And if that's you, we want you to know that we're pulling for you. We're praying for you to reach a conclusion. This week we're going to talk about chair two, though. And for chair two, if we were to take a snapshot of every church in America this morning, that's where most of us would be sitting, in chair number two. The people in chair number two are people who at some point in their past have made a commitment. They've made a spiritual decision. They've decided, they really believe Jesus is who he said he was. They've publicly identified with Jesus. The problem is, for a lot of people, though, that's kind of where it stopped. They kind of hit the brakes at some point, and they never really kept going. So if you ask them, hey, are you a Christian? Their answer would be sure, yeah. You ask them, are you growing as a Christian? Well, I don't know. Maybe. Hopefully. And the word that describes chair two is the word grow. So the question I want us to look at this morning is, how can I grow as a follower of Jesus? What does it take to grow, to mature, to develop? If you have your Bible open, Acts 2, I want to set the scene for you. What you have here is a snapshot of the early church. And the guys and ladies who made up the early church, remember, had seen some incredible things during their time following Jesus. If they've been following Jesus very long, you can go back and read the second half of the Gospels. They'd seen all these incredible things. They'd seen, deaf people get their hearing restored. They'd seen blind people recover their sight. They'd seen dead people come back to life. Most of them were in Jerusalem when Jesus was resurrected from the dead after spending 3 days in the grave. So then they come to the day of Pentecost, and Acts chapter 2, you read about that. Peter stands up and he preaches this incredible sermon, and 3,000 people all come forward to get baptized. During all that, it says there was fire from heaven that came down and looked like tongues of fire, and people started speaking in languages that they never studied. So their whole experience in church, their experience following Jesus has been one spectacular thing after another. It's been one thing that you can never imagine in your wildest dreams, that you couldn't have made up, after another. And now that Jesus has been resurrected, they're all sort of there, and they're sitting on the edge of their seat, and they're wondering what's going to happen next. What's going to be the encore? If Jesus has given sight to the blind, if he's raised the dead, if deaf people can hear, if he's come back from the dead, what in the world is he going to do next? Then you get to verse 42 of Acts chapter 2, and Luke, the writer of Acts, gives us a picture of what came next. And to be honest, when you read this, it seems a little bit anticlimactic. After all the cool things they've seen, after all the incredible things and miracles that have taken place, what happens next seems a little bit ordinary. It seems a little bit too simple. And I think that's why a lot of us struggle. You think about it, most of us, if we were honest, would say in our daily lives, we become preoccupied with all the spectacular things, and we sort of ignore the ordinary things. Let me give an example of what I mean. You go to a ball game, and what you're looking for is a game-winning home run or a game-winning touchdown, and we don't think about the weeks leading up in practice that make those things possible. You go into a bookstore, you get on your Kindle, you download some bestseller, and you read it in a couple of days, and you never think about all the hours and hours and hours that somebody spent putting that together. The new iPhone comes out, and it'll do everything. It'll dress you and drive your car and, make your breakfast and all that. And you run to the Apple store to get the new iPhone, and you never think about the years and years and years of research that went into developing that. Same thing true in your spiritual life. Most of us are obsessed with the spectacular. So you get an unexpected miracle at the doctor's office, and it's awesome. Come to church service, and the place is packed, and people respond, and it's great. You receive an answer to a prayer that you've been praying for a long time, and it's awesome. You're just overwhelmed by that. And if you're not careful, you can fall into the trap of focusing only on the extraordinary moments and neglecting the ordinary moments that make the extraordinary moments possible. That was a lesson that the earliest followers of Jesus had to learn. I want you to look at the way Luke describes what came next. Acts chapter 2, verse 42. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They'd sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. That in mind, here's the key word I want you to focus on. It's that word devoted in verse 42. Underline it, circle it. Luke says the earliest followers of Jesus were devoted to certain things. That word means to be steadfast. It means to have a single-minded focus. So with that in mind, here's this principle that I want you to get. Here it is. Devotion leads to progress. That's really, you can boil it all down to that. Devotion leads to progress. A couple years ago, I came across this podcast somebody sent me. This guy named Stephen Dubner was interviewing this husband and wife who are both psychologists who study human performance. Their whole deal is they go around, they find the top performers in all these various fields. They interview these folks, and they try to identify what it is that sets apart people who, reach the pinnacle of success in their field as opposed to people who are maybe lower performing. They then wrote a book about it titled How to Become Great at Anything. Cool title, isn't it? So when I saw this interview, I thought, well, I'm going to listen to this because I'll be honest with you, I'm not really great at anything. You know what I mean? I'm moderately okay at a couple things, but I'm not great at anything. So I thought maybe I'll learn something. So I listened to this, and they went through and they talked about how when it comes to success, when it comes to reaching peak performance, it has nothing to do with your education, nothing to do with your natural abilities, nothing to do with who your parents are, nothing to do with your resources at your disposal. In fact, it comes down to one thing and one thing only. Anybody know what it is? How much you practice. That's what it is. How much you practice and how you practice. They then in the book, they give these examples of people that we all look to as heroes. Michael Jordan, Wayne Gretzky, Bob Dylan, and we say, boy, those people are just so gifted. They've got such natural abilities. Isn't it great? Wouldn't it be great to be like them? And what the writers of this book are saying, it's not so much their natural abilities as it is how much they practiced and how they practiced. Malcolm Gladwell called it the 10,000 hour rule. You spend 10,000 hours working on anything, you're bound to get better. You're bound to make improvement. Now, here's the connection. So many people get in their spiritual life. They move from chair 1 to chair 2, and then that's where they stop. And they tell themselves, well, I'm not really gifted that way. I'm not really, wired that way. I'm never going to be, a spiritual giant because, you don't know the house I grew up in and all that. And what the writers of that book are saying, same thing is true spiritually, has nothing to do with all that. Has everything to do with how devoted you are, how you practice, and how much you practice over a long period of time. So with that in mind, I want to give you 5 words today. You can write them down on your bulletin, you can write them down in your Bible, on your phone, whatever you want to do. And these are 5 things. If you do these 5 things over a long period of time, you can't help but grow. You can't help but make progress. So here's the first word. It's the word study. Luke tells us that the early followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching. And one of the cool things for them, one of the opportunities they had is that at this point, all the apostles were still alive. So last week we looked at this story of Andrew. He has this encounter with Jesus. He leaves John the Baptist and he follows after Jesus. And you said, well, that's a cool story, but wouldn't it be cool like if Andrew told you the story? Or maybe, you want to know what it was like for Peter to walk on the water, so you just go ask him. That's an opportunity that we don't have because of time and distance. But here's what you do have. You have everything the apostles taught the early church written down for you in the pages of the Bible. What you hold in your hand, what you have on your phone is the apostles' teaching in written form. And that's really an advantage for you because you can take it with you. You can read it as many times as you want. You can study it. You can unpack it. You can do whatever you need to do to make sure that you understand it. And the promise is that when you do that, God himself will meet with you. He'll help you understand it. 2 Timothy 3, here's what Paul says. All Scripture is God-breathed. It means that what you have on your phone, what you have in your hand, is the voice of God in written form. A couple weeks ago, I finally finished a a trilogy of books that I've been working on for almost 2 years about Winston Churchill. The trilogy is titled The Last Lion. It was written by this guy, William Manchester. I've got a picture of Mr. Manchester. Altogether, the series runs over 3,000 pages, which is why it took me a little while. And in my defense, I took a lot of breaks in between. But I was getting down to the last few pages of that final book, and I thought, man, wouldn't it be cool to sit down with William Manchester and just ask him some questions? I mean, I know I'm a nerd, and you probably think, that's so stupid, that doesn't sound fun at all. But for me, that sounds really cool. Wouldn't it be cool to sit and talk with William Manchester? Now, unfortunately, he died right before the third book was completed, so you couldn't do that. But then I got to thinking, what would be cooler than that? What would be really a lot cooler than talking to William Manchester? It would be talking to Churchill. Can you imagine you're sitting there and he's smoking a cigar and you're asking him questions? I mean, wouldn't that be cool? I mean, I know I'm a nerd. You don't have to look at me like that. I know. I get it. But in my mind, I think that'd be so cool. I mean, instead of talking to somebody like about Churchill, wouldn't it be cool like if you could talk to him? And then I thought, that's the opportunity you have with your Bible. Because when you read the Bible, you're not just reading, some interesting stories, written by some interesting people. What you have is God's voice in written form. And he says every time you read it, every time you open this book, he will meet with you. He'll open your eyes to things you need to see. So with that in mind, let me ask you, do you study the Bible? I don't mean do you flip through pages. I mean, do you really study? And if you don't, it's easier now it's ever been. I mean, you go to YouVersion on your phone. You can just send the reading right to your phone. If that's not your thing, I mean, just go home today and read John chapter 1. Tomorrow you get up and read John chapter 2. Next day read John chapter 3. And just start working your way through it. And when you do that, God himself has promised to meet with you. Here's a second word: connect. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship. One of the things you learn as you get older is that a lot of what you accomplish in life is determined by who you surround yourself with. You've heard me say before, and I've read this, that you become the average of the 5 people you're closest to. And I think that rings true. The early followers of Jesus understood, man, if they were going to make it in an increasingly hostile world, they were going to have to do it together. There was no way they could do it alone. Same thing is true for us. The people who tend to grow most in their spiritual life over the long haul are people who have taken the time to connect with other people who are all pulling in the same direction. Now, at our church, we try to give you opportunities to do that. They're basically 3 different levels. I'm going to show you a picture. The first level is the worship service. You come in here on 9 o'clock, 11 o'clock on a Sunday. There's other people. We sing a few songs, listen to a sermon, and if you want to talk to the people around you, you can. If you don't want to, you can sort of slide in and slide out. It's all pretty non-threatening. That's kind of the first level. Next level is the core group level, Sunday school class. You get in a group of 15 or 20 other people. You're studying the Bible together. We've got some great teachers, and if you want to grow in your understanding of the Bible, that's a good place to start. In your bulletin this week, we gave you a list of all the different groups and what they're studying. Now, this Sunday, you've already missed it, but next Sunday, you come, pick you out a group, and I promise you, you'll be glad that you did if you hang with it. Then lastly, we offer the Connect group. We do those several times a year. Smaller group, meets in people's homes. We've probably got 175, 200 people involved in those. And for those people that are involved, they'll tell you that's probably their favorite thing that we do. You get to know other people, you encourage each other, you hold each other accountable. And the point is that none of us here, we're not smart enough, strong enough, good enough to do this on our own. We all need a team of people cheering us on, helping us up when we fall, holding us accountable, encouraging us. And that was one of the secrets of the early church's success. So let me just challenge you. If you're not in any of these groups, if you're not involved in any of these groups, David's going to be out at Connection Point when we get done. You just go out there. We'll help you find the right group. You find the wrong group, we'll get you out of that one. We'll help you find the right one. Everybody needs a group, because for a lot of people, the key to whether or not they make it long term is who they're surrounding themselves with. Here's a third word. It's worship. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, and to the breaking of bread. One of the things we know about the early church is that they enjoyed eating together. Now, that's one area where I think most of us probably get an A+. You know what I mean? You go to these connect groups, it looks like the buffet line at Golden Corral. I mean, it's unbelievable. But what they're talking about here is not so much eating meals together. That was a part of it. But they're talking about something special. They're talking about the Lord's Supper. That's why he calls it the breaking of bread. A little later in Acts 20, Luke tells the early church they met together on the first day of every week to break bread together. That's why we take communion every Sunday. It's what the early church did. It's also a built-in reminder every single week as to why we're here. We gather together for worship, so you don't come to sing a couple songs and listen to some guy talk to you. You come to celebrate the fact that Jesus was dead, buried, and is alive again. And the Lord's Supper is one of the best ways for us to do that. But here's what I don't want you to miss. For those early followers of Jesus, worship was a priority. Not something they did, just when they had some free time. It was something that they built their life around. Look at verse 46. I want you to see this. Verse 46. Every day, they continued to meet together in the temple courts. Worship was not something they went to on the weekend. It was a everyday thing. It was a lifestyle. It was a daily priority. And here's the really cool part. Jesus had promised them that every time they did that, he would show up and be there too. Matthew 18:20, here's what Jesus said, "For where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there I am with them." Promises anytime 2 people come together for the purpose of worshiping Jesus, he's promised to be here. So I don't know about you, but if I could find a place where Jesus had promised to be at a certain time, that's where I want to be. That's why it's so important for every believer to make worship a priority. Here's a 4th word, pray. Early Christians were devoted to prayer. Go through the book of Acts over and over again. They had a challenge, they pray. Opportunity, they pray. Something good happens, they pray. Something bad happens, they pray. Earthquake comes, they pray. Somebody gets arrested, they pray. Somebody becomes a Christian, they pray. Man, they did it over and over and over again. Prayer was the lifeblood of the early church. So with that in mind, I just want to ask you, you don't have to answer, just answer to yourself. How's your prayer life? If you had to give yourself a grade, A, B, C, D, or F, how many times a week do you really pray? And I don't mean, God is good and God's great and help me clean my plate and all that kind of stuff. I mean the real stuff. I mean it's just you and God. It would be hard, if not impossible, to build a relationship with somebody that you never talk to. And yet that's what a lot of us try to do. We want to know more about God, we want to be better, we want to do better, but we never actually talk to God. So if you're here today and you struggle with this, if you struggle with prayer, we'll say 2 things. Number 1, that's normal. Everybody struggles, including me. Everybody struggles. But here's the other thing. Could you do a little better? I mean, I know you can't move into a monastery. I know you're not going to pray 8 hours a day. But could you just, wherever you are now, could you just do a little better? I mean, 10% better, 20% better over the next month. I mean, maybe you set the alarm on your phone and it goes off a couple times a day. And every time it goes off, you just stop what you're doing and you pray. Or maybe you start to keep a list, a little prayer list of things you're concerned about, people you're praying for, and then you start to mark off the answers as they come. And if you do that long enough, you'll start to see some answers, and you'll start to build confidence in your prayer life. Or maybe you just pray with your family before you go to bed. All I know is, I don't know where you are, but I know all of us can do better. I know all of us can kick it up just a notch, and if you'll kick it up, man, just one notch, you'll be surprised what can happen. One more word. It's the word give. Verse 44, Acts chapter 2. All the believers were together. They had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. These early believers of Jesus, man, they were so focused on Jesus. They were so dedicated to advancing his kingdom that possessions and money and all the stuff that we spend our lives chasing after had no power over them. Anytime they saw a need, they sold what they needed to sell. They gave their stuff away. One of the things I love about our church is how generous everybody is. I mean, you guys give, and because of that, you've enabled us to do some really cool stuff ministry-wise. But not only do you give to the church here, we give so much to missions. And sometimes we forget this, but as you and I sit here today, as the other crews in here this morning, there are people literally, man, all over the world. I mean, 10, 12 different countries that are doing what they're doing because of people like you who give. And that's so important. We don't want to forget that. But here's what I don't want you to miss. Here's something I want to make sure you understand. As much as your giving helps other people, the person it helps most is you. Because let me just tell you, God doesn't need your money. He doesn't need your money. He's got me. He owns everything. God can do whatever he wants to do with or without your money. But the reason he tells us to give is not for him, it's for us. Because there's nothing that breaks the stranglehold of stuff like giving it away. There's nothing you can do that'll break the power of stuff over your life like giving it away. There's nothing you can do that'll communicate to the people around you what's really important to you like giving. So let me just ask you, when's the last time you gave to something close to God's heart until it hurt? I mean, when's the last time you sold something so that you could give? When's the last time you went without something so that you could give? When I think about my life and I look at this list, I pray. I don't pray like these guys. And I give, but I don't give like these guys. And maybe as you look at this list, there's probably some things that you could say, that's an area where I could do a lot better. That's an area where I need to take it up a notch. Look how this ends, verse 46. Every day they met together in temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts. Now check out verse 47. Praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. The Lord added to their number daily. Wouldn't it be cool to be a part of a church where people were just coming to Christ daily? But here's what I want you to understand. As cool as that is, as extraordinary as that must have been, what made it possible were the ordinary things they did day after day. It's the ordinary that makes the extraordinary possible. Devotion always leads to progress. This past week, Cannon went to the doctor for his wellness check. It's a physical, what we call it. And you know how that is. You go to a physical and, they measure you and they take your. I'm always hoping for one more inch. You know what I mean? Just one more inch and a few less pounds. And maybe you can relate to that. But when you're a kid, it's different. They're not just checking to make sure you didn't gain weight. They're checking to make sure you did. They're checking to make sure that you're growing like you're supposed to be growing. And if for some reason you're not growing, that's a pretty good indication that something's gone wrong. So the doctor's job then becomes to figure out why you're not growing. So they dig into your family history. Maybe they ask your parents some questions about what you eat and what you drink. Maybe if it goes far enough, they run some tests to see what it is that's delaying the growth. And the point is, if the child's not growing, there's something off. I mean, there's something wrong. There's something that needs to be remedied. Well, as we close today, I want to ask you a question. Are you growing as a follower of Jesus? And if you're not, it's a pretty good indication something may be wrong. For some of you here this morning, you've been sitting in chair number 2 for as long as you can remember. You're not in chair number 1. I mean, you've made a commitment. You really believe Jesus is who he said he was, but that's kind of where it stopped. And for a lot of you, you may have been a Christian, for years, but you're no further along than you were 10 or 15 years ago. And the reason that could be true is because you're not doing these 5 things. You're not praying, you're not giving, you're not connected, you're not studying, you're not worshiping. And maybe for you, I don't know what it is for you, but as you examine your life and your schedule, you could look back and you could pinpoint 1 or 2, 3 areas where you need to take it up a notch. And if you'll do that, the progress will come. Others of you may still be sitting in chair number 1. Maybe you've thought about it all week, and maybe you've reached some conclusions in your own time, and what you need to do today is make a public commitment and respond to his call. And if that's your situation, we're going to stand in just a moment. We're going to sing. If you want to pray with somebody, you want to talk to somebody, you want David or I to help navigate this process, we'll be glad to do that. Others of you may be here, and may be time for you to connect with our team at FCC. Maybe you've been coming for a while and for whatever reason never joined, and if that's what you want to do, I want you to know we'd be glad to have you. Let's stand.